It had to move because we got in a little bit of trouble. I got to tell you, this is, I think, my 4th bus tour that we've been on, and I think that's the first time we've been forced to move the bus by a police officer. So we'll remember this one. I thought he was gonna write us a ticket, quite frankly, which would have been hilarious. But so anyways, we've been traveling around the country in big orange buses like that since 2018 because we, as a group of evangelical pastors, I'm a pastor in the evangelical tradition, and as a group of pastors, we were just absolutely horrified that our tribe, the group that we were a part of, was not just complicit, but was in a lot of ways the cause of some of the worst political decisions in the history of our country, if you know what I'm saying, in 2016. And so we decided that we needed to do more than just complain about it on Facebook. We needed to start getting organized. And so that's what we did. And so we traveled the country encouraging people of faith, particularly white evangelicals and white Catholics and frankly, faith voters from all traditions, to use the common good as their voting criteria. That's what we asked folks to do. That instead of just thinking about yourself when you go vote, you think about your neighbor. We think the idea of loving your neighbor as yourself is something that happens not just in all aspects of your life, but it ought to happen when you go into the voting booth as well. So we ask religious voters to use the common good as their voting criteria. And a lot of our work has to do with the political side of things, and we try to help get people elected who will use the common good as their governing criteria, and we train candidates for office, and we do rallies with candidates, and we never dreamed that we would need to gather in churches like this and say, you know what, insurrections are a problem, and people of faith shouldn't be involved in them. You know, we never would have dreamed. We were like, hey, this whole idea that America is a Christian nation and we as Christians, you know, should be able to move to the front of the line like we had some kind of Disney pass, you know, in life. Like, this is not okay. And so literally about a month ago, as we were getting this tour started, we had this conversation of like, you know what, we really need to spend some time talking about this. Because I don't know about you, but I grew up really fundamentalist. I tell people that the Baptist denomination that I grew up in, we weren't allowed to have anything to do with Southern Baptists because they were too liberal. Just to put it on the spectrum for you there of where I was. So I grew up in this idea that America is a Christian nation and the Bible is the foundation, and Judeo-Christian ethics are the basis of what we are as a country, and it's our God-given right and responsibility to vote our values and be engaged in a very specific way. And my political identity and the party that I was a part of, like that just came right along with my religious identity. It was all mixed up together, all one thing. Doug likes to say it's like you go to Wendy's and order the number 2 combo and the fries just come with it, right? Like that's political identity and religious identity kind of went together like that. I never dreamed that what seemed like a quaint, like, oh, our founding fathers believed in God and America was founded on Christian ideas, like that kind of just the water that I was swimming in, the air that I was breathing, like that kind of idea would so permeate our political culture that it would lead to an insurrection on January 6th, would lead to significant political divisions in our country, and frankly have a lot of us worrying about the future of democracy. So, what we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk to you about Christian nationalism and the threat that it poses. And here's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to be very, very honest with you about how Christian nationalists describe themselves. Because it doesn't do us any good if we just come in here with like scary boogeymen to terrify you, right? Like, we're not bringing like the political advertising commercial that this person is the scariest person of all time, and that's why they're in black and white on your screen. You know, like that. We're not doing that. What we want to do is let folks speak in their own words, give them enough context so that you know that we're not just like, you know, taking something out of context. So we're going to show you a lot of videos where we let folks talk for themselves. And we think that when we do that, it helps us to engage in a much more honest way. We're going to try to help you understand so what Christian nationalism is. I guess I could jump to this slide and just show you here. We're going to show you what Christian nationalism is, and we're going to let folks kind of explain it in their own words. We're going to talk about how people get into Christian nationalism, and we think there's a number of different kind of doorways in, right? Like, this is not a monolithic thing where you can say, you know, what's true about this Christian nationalist might not necessarily be true about this Christian nationalist, which I know makes it more complicated, but that's the reality that we've got to deal with. So we're going to be honest about all of that and try to give you some understanding. We're also going to talk about what churches can do and how churches ought to respond. And then we're going to talk about what we can do as individuals. And ultimately, hopefully, drive it down to the point of empathy and engagement. Because, frankly, we are all in this thing together. And the Christian nationalist in your family, the Christian nationalist who's your neighbor, the Christian nationalist in your Facebook feed, the Christian nationalist that might be your elected official, is still a human being that we're all called to love. And so we're going to ultimately try to leave not in a place of demonization, but leave in a place of empathy. Does that make sense? That's the plan? Well, I have the distinct pleasure to turn things over to Doug Padgett, who's the executive director of Vote Common Good and is going to be our main facilitator. So, Doug, walk us through this.
Yeah. Hey, y'all. Thank you, Rob. I was just leading a little conversation with pastors from the UCC Church in Michigan. Any UCC Church people in the room? Well, they say hello. They said to send their greetings. So I said, I'm going to go talk to these people. And I said they might have some. All right, so here we go. Thank you, Rob, for that really great setup. Look, we believe Christian nationalism is real and it's a threat in the United States. We'll show you a couple of videos. You're going to see this one a number of times. It's videos that look like this. It comes from a special that MSNBC did about a month and a half ago. In fact, it's one of the things that triggered us so much in thinking about what we're going to do when we were on this Faith, Hope, and Love, not Christian Nationalism and Insurrections tour. Not the greatest name for a tour, you know, it's not the roll off your tongue. This special really sort of shook us. MSNBC did it. It's about a woman named Mayra Flores. Representative Flores is the duly elected representative from the 34th Congressional District in Texas, which is South Texas, down by the border. Halligan is the town. You might know of it. She was elected in June because there was a special election. So the person in the seat couldn't fulfill the term, and there was a special election. This caught people's attention for a couple of reasons. One, she ran under a banner of a movement called Make America Godly Again, and is a stated supporter of Christian nationalism in the United States. She's a Latina, and the district flipped from Democrat to Republican. And there's a movement afoot to do this kind of thing all over the country. So that attracted a lot of attention, and MSNBC did a special about it. So we're going to show you 3 different pieces of this because it's both timely and super helpful. And it's going to start out with some other clips about sort of framing up Christian nationalism in the United States today.
Flores is running at a time when Republican candidates around the country have called for religion to play a greater role in government, some of them calling for an end to the separation of church and state, some of them calling for the U.S. to become an explicitly Christian nation.
We need to be the party of nationalism, and I'm a Christian and I say it proudly. We should be Christian nationalists.
The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does.
We asked Congresswoman Flores for her view of government and religion.
Do you think there should be a separation between church and state?
Well, I believe that the government has no business, getting involved with the church. But I do think that the church does have the right to get involved in the government and letting us know, because again, I believe that the church knows the people better than the government. And that is a fact. But I agree that the government has no business, getting involved with the church. There has to be a separation.
Train of thought, do you support the United States becoming a Christian nationalist country?
Yeah, I do. I believe that we should always put God first.
Okay, so there's a lot going on in that little interview, right? This big question, do you think we should be a Christian nationalist country? You can see Representative Flores sort of pause. Yeah, I think we should always put God first. Okay, this is one of the things. Christian nationalism, for a lot of people, is not a familiar term. Like, there's a lot of people who are like, Christian nationalism? No, thank you. And then you say to them, well, what is it? And they're like, I don't know, but I don't want it. It's like that monkeypox thing. Like, I couldn't describe it, but I don't want to be infected with it. And it might even be that for Representative Flores, she doesn't know what the question is entailing. I don't know. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but that could be the case. And she says, no, I think God should be a major part of the country, and that's what I think being Christian and Christian nationalism is. I don't know exactly. The person you'll see in a moment who helped organize her campaign and so on knows exactly what it is and says, oh, I 100% want this to be a Christian nationalist country, and she's part of a whole movement we're putting together. So this is pretty common for people to have a feeling about Christian nationalism, maybe even an understanding of Christian nationalism, but a vocabulary that doesn't go quite far enough. In fact, one of the things we hope you will experience today is to be able to have what I like to refer to as a 1-word, 10-word, and 100-word response to things. Like, sometimes you should just be able to say something in 1 word. Sometimes it might take you a sentence. Sometimes you might want a longer paragraph of description about something. And knowing the difference in a question that you're asked is important, especially when the question is, but do you love me? The 100-word answer is not a great one, right? Like, well, it's complicated, and let's talk about dopamine levels, and, yes or no can do. So some of you might see not Christian nationalism, and you're like, 100% there. If I had to say 9 more words about it of description, or 99 more words about what it is, I'm not sure I could. That doesn't mean it's not alive and well. That doesn't mean it's not functioning. Think of the COVID virus, how much you can describe or could have described in January of 2020 about it. Didn't make it any less real because you don't understand it. It's happening, and this thing is also happening and spreading. It's not just, though, newly elected representatives, or as you saw in that clip, you also saw Representative Green from Georgia and Representative Boebert from Colorado were the other people you saw speaking in there talking about Christian nationalism, duly elected representatives in the United States Congress. It's not just those representatives, it's also the insurrection. So what you're going to see here on this video was shot by a war correspondent in New York, a war correspondent with the New Yorker who was embedded in the front of the insurrection and went in with the first wave of people that broke into the Capitol building. This video is shot in the Senate dais. They're going to be praying a prayer, which I think is a clear articulation of Christian nationalism. They do it through a bullhorn. It's aggressive. It might be something that hits you pretty hard and make your head shake. You'll recognize perhaps some people in it if you paid attention to insurrection news. The person who's often referred to as the QAnon shaman, person had the painted face and the horns. He's the one leading the prayer. So when some people like groups like ours say Christian nationalism is a part of the insurrection and the insurrection is inseparable from a Christian nationalist movement, these are among the reasons why. It wasn't one flag in the back, one cross being carried, one church pastor out there. The very first people in the building articulating what they're doing, reaping that violence, actually pray the Christian nationalism style prayer right there in the building, and here it is.
All the way Jesus Christ, we invoke your name. Amen.
Let's all say a prayer in this sacred space.
Thank you, Heavenly Father, for gracing us with this opportunity. Thank you. Let me take it back. Thank you, Heavenly Father.
Amen.
For this opportunity to stand up for our God-given unalienable rights. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for giving the inspiration needed to these police officers to allow us in this building, to allow us to exercise our rights, to allow us to send a message to all the tyrants, the communists, and the globalists, that this is our nation, not theirs. That we will not allow the American way of the United States of America to go down. Thank you, divine, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent Creator God, for filling this chamber with your white light of love, with your white light of harmony. Thank you for filling this chamber with patriots that love you and that love Christ. Thank you, divine, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent Creator God, for blessing each and every one of us here and now. Thank you, divine Creator God, for surrounding and filling us with your divine, omnipresent white light of love and protection, peace and harmony. Thank you for allowing the United States of America to be reborn. Thank you for allowing us to get rid of the communists, the globalists, and the traitors within our government. We love you and we thank you. In Christ's holy name we pray. Amen.
What's concerning to a lot of us, and maybe to you, is this was not a one-off, and I don't think this is the only time those people and those who support that movement are willing to do actions like that. So what we're talking about is political. Sometimes it's very sedate in its descriptions, and other times it's very violent. It's one of the qualities of Christian nationalism that at any cost will the country be saved by this Christian agenda that's taking place. This person is the one I was referring to earlier. This is Abraham Enriquez, and he's the president of an organization similar to Vote Common Good, where we want to go around and ask voters to make the common good their voting criteria. The difference is we don't want voters to only elect people who are going to insert the voters' religious identity into the government. That's exactly what you're going to hear described about what they're doing. I like to share the story that my congressional representative is Ilhan Omar. I'm from Minneapolis. She's a Muslim woman. I vote for her and give her my support, not because we're in the same faith tradition, but because she's committed to the common good and so am I. And when she goes as my representative, her job then is to represent all of us and to pass laws based on the common law theory in the United States, not simply to turn to a passage from the Quran. Nor do I want a representative who represents me as my senator who is a Christian. I don't want Amy Klobuchar or Tina Smith pulling out Matthew 25 when they want to pass a law. It might motivate me, and the difference between motivation of a voter and the actions of a lawmaker is the difference between Christian or Muslim or non-religious people's participation in civic society versus the government using the power of the government in order to invoke the agenda of a religion. And that's the thing that we're having to differentiate. You'll hear over and over in a number of the presentations of people speaking today that those two streams start to blend together at times. And you'll hear this from Mr. Enriquez here.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Bienvenido's Faith Assembly team? How do you all organize?
In 2019, we realized that to better engage and mobilize the Latino voters and to expose the message of conservative policy, the best way to do it was through the churches, because 8 out of 10 times, if a Latino is being outreached through the church, more than likely they believe in some of the conservative platforms, so it's much easier for them to get out and vote Republican.
The Congresswoman started and ended her campaign in the church. How effective was that?
The most effective.
Yeah.
Myra Flores were able to bring that message to South Texas and say, listen, no more church lockdowns, no more harassment and attacks on the church. Get out and vote for someone that will protect religious liberty. And that's why over, I think, 75, a coalition of over plus 75 churches came together and said, we are supporting Myra Flores through our congregation, letting them know who is running for office.
Is that a new strategy? I mean, is it a new strategy to sort of deploy churches and pastors?
The Democrat Party has been doing that with black churches for years and years and years. And it took outside organizations like Bienvenido to come in and tell churches, hey, it is your right to be involved. So if Republicans don't start strategizing with Latino pastors in churches like the Democrats have done for years with the black church, there will be no victory for conservative candidates across the country.
God, family, and country. Why do you think those three words resonated so much?
It is,
with Latinos specifically,
it is the heartbeat of the Latino community. You can't have moral values without having faith in something, faith in having, understanding that God is, your rights come from God and God only, right? So tying those things into
That's a dangerous thing to say, that your rights come from God and God only. What do you mean by that?
Absolutely not. Are you kidding me? Well, I would rather say that my rights come from God than rights come from government. Government can take away my rights. I mean, in the Constitution, we have unalienable rights that come from our Creator, being that we have the opportunity of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That only comes from you understanding that there is a moral conscience, right? And for Latinos, that means believing that our rights come from, our God-given rights come from God and not government. And I think that Congresswoman Myra Flores is able to make that a political campaign.
When I talked to the Congresswoman, she even said that she would support the United States becoming a Christian nationalist country. Mm-hmm. Those are her words. Mm-hmm. Do you support something like
100%.
that?
100%.
100% support of it being a Christian nationalist country. A whole conversation in there about where do our rights come from. Yeah, they come from God, but if the government doesn't matter, you want to talk about the early years of this country when rights were not extended to people or rights are taken? Sure. But that business there, that's a good conversation. We should all be having that. That's good political conversation. But then this should be a Christian nationalist country is the point. What you're going to hear a number of times as we make our way through this conversation from experts that you're going to see on the videos is that Christian nationalism is not about individuals expressing their faith. That's not what this is. The awareness raising that Christian nationalism is a problem is not that Christians are being public or that Christians are running for office or that any faith tradition is motivating its people to be active in civic life. That's not the problem. The problem is when the government exercises its own authority and its power to advocate for, to derive its authority from, or to privilege any particular faith. So it's not about the citizenry or voters or motivating people. It's about the government recognizing that its job is to represent everyone and to make no religion preferenced or diminished. That's what is often referred to as the Establishment Clause. We're not going to get into a constitutional conversation here. We're going to keep this sort of at normal level conversation. But what it basically means is people can be motivated by all kinds of things to vote and to get involved and to protest and to shake our fists and to cheer on our elected officials. The government, on the other hand, establishing the United States as an official religion, a particular official religion in the United States is another thing. So we need to distinguish between citizens' motivations and the government's role and authority when we're talking about Christian nationalism. This is a definition that came from a really great article, actually, in Rolling Stone magazine in September. So if you're interested in reading more about it or spreading it along, you can look up a Rolling Stone magazine about Christian nationalism. And they describe Christian nationalists as holding the view that America is anointed by God to convert the world to Christianity by force, if necessary, and seeking to accelerate Jesus' return to rule over the earth. There's a whole movement of Christian nationalism that's really about evangelism. And goes on to say that the divine mission as they see it will be carried out when true believers seize the control of the institutions of the United States government. I have in my mind a couple of friends of mine who I think are Christian nationalists. They get iffy whether they like the title or not. I often joke, the title of being a Christian nationalist is kind of like when someone refers to me as a Midwesterner because I'm from Minnesota. Okay, technically, yeah, I'm from Minnesota and I'm a Midwesterner, but I don't wake up in the morning being like, oh, it's good to be a Midwesterner, you know? But when you travel somewhere else and someone says, where are you from? And they don't know the geography, I'll say I'm from the Midwest. Oh, okay, good enough. Because, a lot of people confuse Minnesota and Michigan and Montana anyway. So I just say I'm from the Midwest, right? It makes it easier. Flyover country. Well, it's an accurate description of where I am, even though I don't use it as a self-identifier. Christian nationalism can be an accurate description of where people are in their belief systems, even though they don't use it as a self-identifier. So I have a couple of friends of mine who hold these views, and I like to imagine them sitting here in the room, and whenever I talk about this stuff or anything we show on the screen that says, here's what Christian nationalists are up to, in my mind, I want to say it in such a way, we want to present in such a way that they would nod along and say, yep, you've got us right. That's fair. We're not caricaturing them. We're not overstating. Yep, they would agree with this statement. The divine mission is to take over the institutions of government to bring about God's agenda to the world. Totally comfortable with that kind of idea. I mean, sure, other faiths are welcome, but it's ours. So if you want to wrap your brain around this, maybe use this as a comparison. I saw a trainer on racial diversity, and there's a room about this size, about this many people, and they're being trained in diversity. And he said, how many of you are committed to diversity? And people raised their hands. And he said, now if you have your hand up, will somebody just say, what's in your thoughts here? Diverse from what? And when they said diverse from white, he said, well, that's where we're going to start. Because you're beginning with whiteness as the norm, and then you want to let other people into the same experience that whiteness as the norm gets. Why are we starting with whiteness as the norm? True diversity wants to recognize that power has been given to some and not equally to others, so we shouldn't start with that as the norm, right? So this is kind of same thing with Christian nationalism. For a lot of Christian nationalists, they just begin with the assumption that Christianity is the norm. It's the default. We'll get to some of the reasons why those views are held. These folks are among that crowd. These are the people from the Family Research Council. You might be familiar with some of the work that they've been doing over a long time. They are about as polar opposite on this topic as we could be on this topic. And so they ran a session online and in person on October 12th, half a month ago. And half a month? Who says half a month? Half a month ago. That's hilarious. 18 days ago, they ran this, and their question was the rise of the term Christian nationalism. Where did it come from, and how is it being used? Former representative from the great state of Minnesota, where I come from, Michelle Bachmann was there. The pastor of the church where it was held is there. Tony Perkins was a part of it, and the two other people that study these issues were there. What they're getting at is that the problem is the term. It's just a term being used to be hard on Christians. Why do I think that? Well, because I watched 95% of the entire thing. Tim and Nick managed to watch the whole thing. I had to stop for my own well-being. But I would commend to you to watch it if you want to. It's all online. It's about an hour and 45 minutes. But they asked this question during the course of it and asked people to vote. What is Christian nationalism? One, I'm not certain what it is, but definitely not what the left says it is. Can be the answer to anything you disagree with. Question two, or answer two, it's a creation of the media. Answer three, it's an attempt to intimidate Christians who care about their country. Or number four, all of the above. Probably doesn't surprise you that by the end of their presentation, 72.3% of people had chosen all of the above. It didn't really matter which one you picked. What's not on the list is it's a true political movement that is a threat to the well-being of the United States that is highly funded and involves more than 56% of the American population. That's not an option. Just, it's what the left says. It's something made up by the left, something made up by the media, something trying to keep Christians from being good Christians in America. So this is the other part of the conversation that's going on, is arguing about what Christian nationalism is. I'll show you a number of examples. The pastor's in the middle. He's responding to Joe Biden using the phrase for his campaign and for his presidency that the government needs to care about the soul of America. And you'll hear the pastor's response here.
It's the right and privilege and duty and responsibility and honor of the Church of Jesus Christ to take care of the soul of America, in the sense that we have the gospel, which is the only good news that heals the soul of America, or any country.
So who's responsible for the soul of America? Not the government. The Church of Jesus Christ as understood by him as a sole responsibility. In fact, for any country. Christian nationalism is a global movement to put Christian identity, Christian leaders, Christian governments around the world to bring about the agenda of God for the world. That's what they're up to. Not just to win an election here and there, not just to swing the balance of power, not just to put in some good new tax policy because the government needs to get off the back of the good old American people. No, not that old stuff. These folks, what they're talking about is an entire agenda that wants to push forward something around the agenda of Christianizing the world. Okay, so back to this little point. We have to distinguish between the citizens' roles and the motivation of the government. When Jeff Sessions was the Attorney General of the United States, and just as a reminder, that's the chief law enforcement officer of the federal government and of the entire system. He gave this press conference, which you'll see a brief bit of here, where he describes the beginning of what's referred to as family separation policy, removing children from their parents' custody if the parent chooses to cross the U.S.-Mexico border seeking asylum, which, by the way, is a legal action to do. And, don't get me going on this, it's the only way someone can seek asylum. You cannot seek asylum without being in the United States. Some of us are old enough to know the old stories of, like, people from the Soviet Union who wanted to seek asylum in the United States and had to sneak in playing chess or something and then hustle themselves to an embassy somewhere and seek for asylum, right? You have to do it on U.S. soil. So when people cross the bridges or cross the river onto U.S. soil, turn themselves over to Border Patrol and ask for asylum, that's how you're supposed to do it. The Trump administration chose to criminalize that and to remove children from their parents if people did it, as a way to warn them and to give consequence if they tried it. And the justification for that law, according to Jeff Sessions, is this.
And I would cite you to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government, because God has ordained the government for his purposes. Orderly and lawful processes are good in themselves. Consistent, fair application of law is in itself a good and moral thing, and that protects the weak. It protects the lawful. Our policies that can result in short-term separation of families is not unusual or unjustified.
Okay, I would disagree with him on that last statement. Yes, it is. And the middle statement, I would agree with him. Yes, we should have lawful processes that go through. For sure. Like people coming to the country and, search warrants of properties, like all that stuff. Yep, we should do that. This beginning, though, I want to tell you about the new law that we're going to put in place, the new practice of our law. And what is it? Let's start with Romans chapter 13. That is not something that is appropriate. That is what fuels Christian nationalists to support the Trump administration. We do these sessions. We try not to be partisan about things. It's just really hard when you're trying to describe the actual thing and former administrations and current representatives are the only ones doing it. If I could find a clip of a Democrat, because there are Democrats who also hold Christian nationalist views. This is not only one party or the other. They just don't tend to be as public about this, and when they are in power, they don't actually act on it. So what's going on here is something that is absolutely a violation at the highest level, and this is what's made a lot of people freak out about Christian nationalism, because it's been at the highest level of our federal government and is also being talked about in other ways, including at the insurrection in the way. So you start to see a picture here, right? And you good people of Pennsylvania, you don't need us to remind you of this, but then there's also this.
We have the power of God with us. We have Jesus Christ that we're serving here. He's guiding and directing our steps. And in November, we're going to take our state back. My God will make it so.
So what do you do for a candidate that does feel that they're called by God, like the Blues Brothers, and they're on a mission from God? Well, okay, that's fine. Look, we travel around in a bus talking to people. Like, we must have some sort of a complex going on. But somewhere, your call can't just simply be, we're going to take the country back by God through our administration, and we're going to now make this Pennsylvania before the Union of States. We decided that the Confederate colonies would join together into a union under a new constitution and not establish religion in our states. But that has been an argument going on for 246 years, and people are at varying levels of wanting to move forward with that promise or to reverse on that promise. You all know this better than I do, so I'll stop talking about that. Okay, want to just take a minute here. We're going to introduce you to some people. We're going to describe some things about Christian nationalism, but just want you to have a chance to breathe for a second, okay? We get it. We hit you with a lot there. There's a lot of things coming at you from the prayers and from the conversations, so if you need to stand up or breathe or stretch or something, feel free. If anybody has something you need to say out loud, if you're an extrovert like some of us, you're just, sometimes the only way you can get it out of your brain is to get it out of your mouth. Yes. Say it again.
I took photos of a few of your slides. Is that okay?
Yes. Feel free to take photos of any of those and then put them out on the internet and tag us in it so we know that people know that they're out there, okay? But feel free. And any of the rest of this that you want, we'll be glad to share it with you. Okay, one more comment, yeah.
Surely this is about the fact that globalism is real, that that white people are going to be the minority in this country within 20 years, I think, that the world has changed enormously, that we can't do business without countries all around the world. We are, by definition, diverse across whatever measure you wish to use. And that diversity is making us better, bigger, bolder, able to do more kinds of things and have a bigger idea. But it is so threatening to people of loss of their own identity and power. I mean, isn't that just bedrock in this, that the world has changed, it will continue to change, has been changing for decades now, and it isn't going their way. I mean,
yeah. Thank you. Look, the new variant of Christian nationalism is impacted by the realities of our world, of which you've described well. But let's also remember that Christian nationalist movements have existed from before the establishment of this country, during them. The KKK was not worried about then they were worried about slaves being incorporated, former slaves being incorporated into the United States. There's always a motivation. What I want to encourage you to do is don't minimize the rationale for why people hold Christian nationalist views and think it's only because of changes in demography. That won't explain it. There are too many people who hold these views who are not into white nationalism or white fragility or white fear. It's that, yes, but not only that. It's almost like when you look under your desk at work or someone's desk at work and you see all those all those wires that are all tangled together and you can't tell where one, but they all run into one, outlet. That outlet, that's Christian nationalism. And you got white Christian nationalism coming in there, and you got globalists coming in. Like, they're all sort of tying together. You're going to hear that here in this next little segment from some of these experts who study this, that it's not just one issue that's driving all of this. There's a much larger agenda that's not simply, we don't like the way things in the country are going. That's almost like it's the accelerant, but it's not the logs and it's not the flame. So there's a lot more going on. To that point, I'll introduce you to Catherine Stewart. She wrote this great book. So if you're a photo snapper and you want to take this book with you and remember it, it's called The Power Worshippers Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism. Catherine is a great expert on all of this, and she makes it pretty clear that, look, this is not just some people, this is a much larger group of people, and this is Catherine. Oh, I should just tell you, this, you're going to see this frame a number of times too, where we interview a number of people. We put together a curriculum back in April of 2021 after the insurrection, responding to this. That's a lot. These are live conversations that we recorded. They're available on our website and our YouTube channel. We've also shortened them into the little pieces you're going to see here and then put a PDF curriculum with them for small group discussions. And now you're experiencing some of it in a live format. So if any of what you hear from Catherine or others that are on the screen that looks like that, you're going to, you're welcome to download that information later. Stephanie Spalding, someone named Christy Berghoff, and I were the hosts of this 6-week series, so we're the other faces that you see occasionally popping up on the screen.
Let's talk about what Christian nationalism is, and let's talk about what it is not. The first thing to know is it's not Christianity or even a religion at all, properly speaking. It's a political ideology, and its representatives insist that the foundation of legitimate government is bound up with a reactionary understanding of the Christian faith. It basically says that the United States is founded on the Bible and that our country can only succeed if it stays true to this foundation. It's also a device for mobilizing and often manipulating large segments of the population by getting them to vote for the political candidates that the movement favors, and basically for creating a new elite, concentrating power in the hands of a new leadership cadre of people who subscribe to illiberal ideologies. It's important to know that it's a leadership-driven movement. It's not sort of bottom-up. It's not driven by the rank and file. It's a top-down movement. Or to say something else about what the movement is not. It is not just about evangelicals. I mean, it includes some evangelicals, but it excludes many evangelicals, including some white evangelicals and most evangelicals of color. And it also includes representatives of a variety of both Protestant and non-Protestant religion. Ultra-conservative Catholics, in particular, have become a critical element, and the movement actually even drives support from individuals and groups that do not identify as Christian at all. And what unites them is not a distinct theology, but a common political vision.
She's really great. Really commend you to her book and to other videos that she does. This idea that it's a political movement, not a religious movement. It uses religion in a particular way. Another person that's going to be very clarifying on this is named Amanda Tyler. Amanda she's executive director of an organization called Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. And if you're not familiar with the American Baptists and their long history of fighting for the separation of church and state in America, you might see things like Baptist Joint Committee and Religious Liberty and only think about the conservatives. The American Baptists are on the other side of that wing, and they've started an effort in 2019. They saw this before a lot of others as a real threat. A sign-on letter and curriculum under something called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. So at christiansagainstchristiannationalism.org, you can find their materials and all. We really love their organization. We do a lot of work together. We work on all this curriculum together. So we're real partners in all of this. And this is Amanda up in the upper right corner.
I think that's really a vital point, because we should have a common understanding about what we're talking about as far as Christian nationalism goes. And I'm going to point to the statement that's available at christiansagainstchristiannationalism.org. You know, the work that we did back in 2019 was about providing an advocacy platform for people who were interested in learning more and for taking a public stand. And the centerpiece of the project is a statement. And in the statement itself, we define Christian nationalism as a political ideology that seeks to merge our identities as Americans and Christians. So a few things here. You know, one, we are specifically talking in the American context. This is something that comes up. This is not particular to the United States, but in our work, we are really focusing on the American expression of Christian nationalism. And so we talk explicitly about American and Christian identities. But we also want to distinguish that Christian nationalism is not Christianity. Christian nationalism is a political ideology. Christianity is a religion. That said, you can't totally divorce Christianity out of it. It'd be great just to say, oh, this has nothing to do with Christianity. Yeah. That would be really easy, right? That's not accurate. And that's because Christian nationalism uses the narratives and the symbols, and in some cases, even the theology of Christianity to further this political ideology. But as we define Christian nationalism, it is not itself a religion. It is more about identity than religion in a lot of ways. And we get at this in one of our resources that we have available at Christians Against Christian Nationalism, a really handy one-pager that your guests last week, Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry, helped us put together called What is Christian Nationalism? And we talk about how it's more identity than religion. When we define Christian nationalism, I think it's also important to say what it's not. It's not patriotism. Patriotism is a love of country, and we can show our love of country in a number of different ways. We can wave an American flag, we can protest in the streets, we can exercise our constitutional rights, right? These are all different ways to be patriotic. Nationalism is a love of country that also requires an allegiance to it above everything else, including our theological views. And so when our theological view, when our patriotism starts to ask us to sacrifice our theological views, that's no longer patriotism, that's nationalism. And particularly as we're talking about here, Christian nationalism.
Super helpful, right? That it's this political movement that is combining these issues together. Now we're going to show you a conversation we had with Sam Perry and Andrew Whitehead. They've written a book called Taking America Back for God. That's a phrase you hear a lot. You'll hear a lot in our descriptions, is taking America back. Raises a big question about who's the we, what are we taking, and who's got it now, right? These kinds of things. They address some of those issues. Their subtitle is Christian Nationalism in the United States. In case you're worried, they mean the threat of Christian nationalism in the United States. So they come from that perspective. They're sociologists, so they do what sociologists do, and they take long surveys, and then they turn those into ways to understand the reality in our country. So these are the kinds of surveys that they do. It asks a series of questions, and like they do on surveys, then a certain percentage of people will respond in particular ways, like should the federal government declare as a Christian nation, or was the U.S. Constitution inspired by God, and so on and so forth. So they take all of this language and all of these questions, and they created a scale. And for our purposes and what they're going to talk about in the video clip that you're going to see, this is really important. They created a scale that put points. So depending on how you answered the questions, you would end up with a point or 2 points or 3 points or 5 points for each question. And when those get totaled up, it lands you somewhere along this scale. Then they put titles underneath the point values. So on this side, they talk about the rejectors, the people who reject Christian nationalism. You know, people that show up at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a perfectly good Sunday to talk about this, right? And then there's the resistors. These might be people who, they don't think Christian nationalism is a big deal. They don't want it to happen. They want to vote against it, but they're not going to show up to a meeting or travel around on a bus or something like that. On this far side, then there's the ambassadors. They're sort of the mirror image of the rejectors. These are the people pushing for it. Some of the people you've seen in the videos so far are people advocating for Christian nationalism, right? They would score very high on the responses. And then there's the accommodators. The accommodators are like the resistors, where they'll say, yeah, I know Christianity, we shouldn't make it the official rule or something, but it's our starting point. So at the Friday night football game, we might as well have a Christian prayer. Makes sense to me. Or, pastors should get to marry people, or, we should have chaplains that serve in the Senate, and they should be Christian pastors and Christian clergy. Maybe invite others, but, default to that kind of thing, right? So they're not advocating for it. They're not buying off of Representative Green's website proud Christian nationalist t-shirts, but they're kind of go along with the idea. Now, here's the thing that they come up with, and they're going to reference this in a moment. 21% or so of the U.S. population falls in this category. to some people, these are the only folks that they will recognize as being Christian nationalists. Like, if you don't choose the title yourself, then you're not one. So about 21%. So if you're in conversations with others and people are like, I know people are doing all this stuff about Christian nationalism, they think so many people, but it's only like 20% of the population. But just pause for a second and think, okay, 2 out of 10 people are advocating for the stuff you've just heard, right? They would suggest that the Christian nationalist view is also inclusive of the accommodators. And this is 30 to 36% of the population. So you can get to 50, 55% of the US population is in the accommodator or the ambassador category. Which means this isn't fringe. Every grocery store you go into, every church, every room that's not full of just, rejectors and resistors by definition, has the possibility of people who hold these views. So let's not think about them as obscure sort of unicorns that exist somewhere and are going to do some dark magic. It's us. This is the American population. 50% of us, meaning it's America. So what are we going to do? We can't demonize our way out of 50% of people believing issues that could lead to the support of these kinds of ideas. We have to be actively engaged in other ways that are not simply that. All right, so you're going to hear from Andrew and from Sam. There is so much just in this 3-minute little clip here. There is so much in it, so we know it comes fast, but buckle up because it's really great.
Yeah, well, I'll dive in first and then let Sam finish it off. So in our book, we performed were able to get data on these large national surveys, and we asked respondents 6 different questions where they could strongly disagree to strongly agree with them. Things like, the United States is part of God's plan, or the federal government should advocate Christian values, or declare the U.S. a Christian nation. And so the degree to which people strongly agreed with those or strongly disagreed, we assigned them point values, and we're able to create a scale by adding all those different questions together. And we did that because it's really important to understand that Christian nationalism isn't a binary, yes or no, but that Americans really are all along a spectrum where some embrace it really strongly. Some, see, Christianity being a part of what we do in the U.S. is important, and others kind of resist that, or the rejectors who we see on the very end of the scale say, there should be no fusion of this type of Christianity, which we define in our book is really this idea of a white, conservative, natural-born citizen. That's the Christian that they're talking about. American civil society shouldn't be fused to this type of Christianity. And so when we're able to create that scale, we can now look at, well, how do these respondents view the world? And there were 3 basic things that we tried to do throughout the book and were our main takeaways. Is the first, that Christian nationalism matters. And so Sam, he'll be able to share, even with his more recent data, that when we're looking at anti-democratic attitudes, or we're looking at policing of African Americans, if we're looking at immigration, if we're looking at refugees, if we're looking at religious minorities, we're looking at all these different important hot button issues, Christian nationalism consistently matters. Over and above whether you're Republican or Democrat, whether you're an evangelical or a mainline Protestant or unaffiliated, whether you attend church a lot or you believe the Bible should be read literally, when we account for all those things, Christian nationalism is still consistently one of the most important predictors. So what that tells us is that this is a key lens through which Americans view their social worlds. Whether they embrace it or reject it, it is doing work in how people are interacting with their world. The second thing we find is that Christian nationalism is not only really important, but it's an actual thing. And I just use kind of this, non-sociological language here, because it isn't just racism, it isn't just conservative politics, it isn't just authoritarianism, but that it is something different. It's its own thing, and so we're studying that. And then our final kind of main finding is that Christian nationalism does not necessarily equal being religious or being evangelical or being a faithful Christian. Because we find that those that reject Christian nationalism but maybe attend an evangelical Protestant church, they look completely different from fellow evangelicals who might embrace Christian nationalism really strongly. And so this is something that cuts across religious traditions. So if you're a white Catholic or a white mainline Protestant who embraces Christian nationalism, the likelihood that you really support the insurrectionists is equally high to white evangelicals, what we're finding. And so this is something that really operates across religious traditions. And so those are some of the key kind of points we make in the book. But Sam's been collecting some amazing data lately. And so, yeah, Sam, I'll let you share just a little bit of that.
Yeah, I mean, just to finish off the discussion of the book, though, I think the way the book progresses is we describe how really Christian nationalism worships at the holy trinity of power, boundaries, and order. It values three things primarily: power, and making sure that our group stays in power and is able to maintain that power. We demonstrate that in the book through its Christian nationalist support of Donald Trump and his policies and his brand of politics. And we've been able to demonstrate that in subsequent studies as well. That Christian nationalism, and especially white Christian nationalism, is very concerned with maintaining proper boundaries between us and them. That's really one of the things that Christian nationalism boils down to, is marking off who is the us that has the rightful power in the United States and who is the them that we oppose and want to make sure that we marginalize or oppress or drive out. And then the last one is order. Christian nationalism at its core longs to establish and reinforce a very particular traditionalist social order in which everybody recognizes their proper place in the family, in society, in the church. And so it manifests in a variety of ways, but really that's kind of the breakdown of the book, is how Christian nationalism reinforces and worships at that holy trinity of power, boundaries, and order.
Christian nationalism, they suggest, is a real thing, and it's a predictor of other social effects. It's about power, boundary, and order. You'll see it over and over. Now, if you think back to that prayer that you heard prayed in the Senate dais, and you're like, oh, we're going to drive out the globalists and the communists and the atheists because this is our country and not theirs. As we go through and you see some other examples of how people are manifesting Christian nationalism in just normal, ordinary ways, you'll start to see those patterns showing up. That's what it's organizing around to do. So we're spent a lot of time here letting you know about what the ambassadors and the accommodators are thinking about Christian nationalism. We like to have this little moment here to remind us that there's also the resistors and the rejectors, right? So a little bit of good news for you that you're in good company. It's still 50% of the American population. Well, Dan Dietrich, who travels with us, who you heard earlier, wrote his own song. He did a song from did you do For What It's Worth at the start? Yeah, he did that song. That song was made in November of 1966. I was born in July of 1966. So in other words, my entire life we've been singing, hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Hey, brother, let's love one another. It's ongoing work. In other words, old people are like, yeah, we've been singing that our whole lives. It takes a while because we need more songs, and we need more songs that call us to keep singing. Dan wrote one of these. He might tell you, are you going to tell him about it, or do you want me to tell him about it?
I'll say a little
Okay.
bit. Thanks. But yeah, I was a worship pastor for about 14 years. I grew up in the church and started playing guitar in youth group, and spent a lot of hours in church, I'll put it that way. And that's why I was so confused, so angry when in 2016, 81% of white evangelicals, the community that I come from, voted for a man like Donald Trump. And it wasn't just that they reluctantly pulled the voting lever, right? It was that they continued to champion this person after every line in the sand that I thought, surely this is the moment that the people that taught me about love and integrity and goodness will speak up. And every line in the sand, they just continued to throw their weight behind this person. So I put my frustrations and sadness into a song, and it's called Hymn for the 81%. I grew up in your churches, Sunday morning and evening service. I knelt in tears at the foot of the rugged cross. You taught me every life is sacred, feed the hungry and clothe the naked. I learned from you the highest law is love. And I believed you when you said that I should trust the words in red to guide my steps through a wicked world. And I assumed you'd do the same. So imagine my dismay when I watched you lead the sheep straight to the wolves. You said to love the lost. Well, I'm loving you now. You said to speak the truth. Well, I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice roll down. Oh, they started putting kids in cages, ripping mothers from their babies. And I looked to you to speak on their behalf. Oh, but all I heard was silence. Or worse, you justified it, singing glory, hallelujah, raise the flag. See, your fear had turned to hatred, but you baptized it with language torn from the pages of the good book. You weaponized religion, and you wonder why I'm leaving to find Jesus on the wrong side of your walls. And you said to love the lost. Well, I'm loving you now. You said to speak the truth. Well, I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice roll down. Come home, come home. You're better than this. Or you taught me better than this. Come home, come home. You're better than this. Or you taught me better than this. Come home, come home. Oh. Maybe I was too naive, or I just didn't want to see that there's always been a little poison in the well. Our churches sit on stolen land, a nation built by stolen hands, and we use the Bible to justify it all. Yeah, from slavery and segregation to mass incarceration. This is who we are, but not who we have to be. There's a lot of work to do to pull up the evil by the roots, but repentance has to come before there's peace. You said to love the lost. I'm trying to love you now. You said to speak the truth. That's why I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome, injustice roll down. May love overcome, injustice roll down. May love overcome, injustice roll down. May love overcome and justice roll down. Thank you so much.
We're talking about through a friend. We reached out and contacted Dan and said, "Hey, any chance you come to Minneapolis?" He was living in Indiana. "Could you come to Minneapolis?" He's like, "Well, yeah, my church fired me for that song, so yeah, I guess I could come and travel with you." And so now he travels around with it. So in a little bit, Nick's going to invite you to get on the bus with us, and we're kind of serious about that. We might want to get you on the bus with us. All right. Sort of part 2 of understanding Christian nationalism. And by the way, the times for our 3 segments, what is it, what can we do, and what can churches do, they're not equal in our presentation, so it's okay. I want to suggest to you the call to empathy, the call of love, to understand how people get into this stuff. What's going on? What are they thinking about? Yes, it is, as we heard, it's rooted in some experience that people are having, but it's more than that. If you ask someone, tell me why you're into Christian nationalism, they're not going to say, well, I don't like the demographic changes. They're going to describe a different rationale. I hope that we're describing here that people who are in the ambassador and accommodator sections would say, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Okay, so there's 5 sections. We're going to show you some video that sort of bring all of these to life. One of them is the question of, how was the country founded? There's still a big question about the origin story of our country. For some people, this is a huge driver. You'll hear video segments where people are saying, get the country back to the way it used to be, like when it was founded. Okay, that's a driving force. Lots of good conversation. If you're going to engage with people who are engaged in Christian nationalism, one of the things you're going to want to get good at is talking about the founding of the country, or good at just listening to them talk about why they think the founding of the country was as a Christian nation and we should get back to it. It will come up over and over at varying points. But different people followed 5 different streams into Christian nationalism. So some are more into the founding of the country, but for other people, they're more into this basic confusion between the church and the people. And some of that's caused because in Christianity, a lot of us like to talk about the fact that churches aren't buildings, they're not institutions, they are the people. So churches are people. And we, the people, elect our representatives, and we, the people, go to Congress. So the church is the people, and the people represent the government, and the people and the government aren't different things. It's a government of the people and by the people, and the church is the people. So what's the difference between the church and the people? That happens a lot. There's a lot. You'll hear it sort of when Representative Flores said, yeah, I think we should always put God first. The country or the people, or the church knows the people better than the government knows the people, but the government is the people. So, right, it just happens a lot. So some of the conversation you'll be having with folks is really tied up in a less than clear articulation of this issue. But for others, it's about seeing the United States as the new Israel to accomplish God's plans in the world. That's that definition we saw out of the Rolling Stone article. Here's the idea. When I told you I have these 2 friends in my mind, one that now is sitting here and one that's sitting over there. The one in my mind that's sitting over here, I asked him about Christian nationalism, tested some of this material with him, wanted to make sure we were representing it well. I wanted to talk to him about this thing, and he said, here's how I understand it. Only 2 nations, he says, were born out of an idea from God. The nation of Israel, through Abram, and the United States of America. Those 2, older, smaller brother, younger, bigger brother, those 2 are unique in God's imagination for God's agenda for the world. So kind of a founder's narrative, but also that the United States is the new Israel. So what happens, and you'll see it in the videos we show you, is people start to then take Jewish texts, Jewish prayer shawls, Jewish horns of prayer horns, meeting on the Sabbath, all of the artifacts and treasures of Jewish faith, and using them in Christianity in order for the blessings of Israel to become the blessings of the United States. The passage from 2 Chronicles 7:14, anyone familiar with that? If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and confess their sins and pray, then I will heal their land. Okay, that passage. Direct from Chronicles to the United States. So that which is spoken to Israel is spoken to the U.S. You'll see some examples of this. In fact, you're going to see a sermon from Lauren Boebert in a moment where she goes directly from Queen Esther straight to your county commissioners without a comma. Right there. Because the view is no difference. Promise of God to Israel, promise of God to the people of the United States. Now, some people just do that with churches, right? Like the promise to Israel becomes a promise to the church. These folks are saying the promise of Israel becomes the promise to the nation of the United States. Then that breeds a holy war narrative, and then that all breeds the role of the United States in God's ultimate plan by having anointed leaders who are going to fulfill God's plan in the world. So we'll show you some examples of those. But these are 5 streams that people utilize to get into Christian nationalism. So we'll show you this one. This is Representative Boebert. Not only is she the preacher at this Cornerstone Church on this Sunday back in July of this year, but she's also a representative from Colorado in the United States Congress. What they're applauding for at the beginning is she is talking about the COVID shutdown and how it was the wrong thing to do and churches shouldn't have had to shut down during COVID. That's also what she ends this portion of the sermon with. And in the middle of it is the part that you saw earlier where she says, I'm sick and tired of this separation of church and state junk. It's not in the Constitution, that part. I want you to see how she gets into it and how she gets out of it. And what's framing it is the pandemic. By the way, the new variant of Christian nationalism is fueled by the country's response to the pandemic, and that churches were not given exceptional status as essential workers. That you could fly in airplanes, but you couldn't meet in this room. And they were saying that's an overstep. And look, that's, to my view, we should have that conversation. How do we do this? We should be having it and let public health, and that's good, normal. They don't like the way it went, and that is what's fueled so much of the Christian nationalism movement, as well as what you'll hear in a little bit, which was Donald Trump losing the election, which couldn't have been possible because he was God's anointed leader. But we'll get to that one in a minute. And that's not a punchline, and that's a really serious one. But here's Lauren Boebert. So that's what she's talking about. That's what the applause is, and then she comes in at the end with it again. And just watch the move she does with the book of Esther and how it has to do with what we should be doing today.
Just because it comes from someone who's elected or a bureaucrat doesn't mean that it's right. This isn't about Republican and Democrat. This is about evil and good, right and wrong. And if you go to Esther 4, in verse 14, Mordecai is talking to Esther, and he says, "For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish." Mordecai is telling Esther, if you remain silent, if you don't show up to your board of county commissioners, if you don't show up to your school boards, if you don't let your elected representatives know what's on your mind, deliverance will come at some point from another place, but not from you. And you will be stuck in that bondage and suffer and perish because of it. The dreams and the gifts and callings that God has on you will remain dormant. If you are silent, you lose by default. That's why I run my mouth often and give God glory. I don't want to lose by default. I don't want to be disqualified. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Now we could take that scripture and make it really cliche. It sounds really pretty and it looks really good on the front of a notebook. But this is powerful because you are called to the kingdom for this time. And you are called to be bold, to go out with power. You are anointed to set at liberty the captives. Esther had that revelation. She said, I won't remain silent. In fact, I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. The reason we had so many overreaching regulations in our nation is because the church complied. The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. That is not how our founding fathers intended it. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does. I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. I will open my church and allow my people to assemble, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. I will not mask our children in school, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Thank you for your boldness.
The "thank you for your boldness" line is a reference to the fact that the pastor who's sitting there didn't shut down the church during COVID and was prosecuted for it. And you might remember that story of the church in Colorado where the pastor was arrested for illegally assembling people. That's the church. So that's what's going on. You could see a lot of things happening in there, including the call to go to your school boards and to go to your county commissioner's office, straight out of the book of Esther's call. No distinction. Some of us who've studied the Bible and do biblical hermeneutics have a hard time watching that. Other people's heads just sort of snap back. I like to watch the crowd when she lands that line, and people are just like, how did she get to the county commissioners? Well, regardless of how she got there, people mean it. This is the town you're going to meet Nick in a little bit. This is the Patmos Library in West Michigan, and there was a vote to not fund the library in August because a bunch of people got together and defunded the library in the election. Now, it was funded by author who paid $50,000 to keep the library working until its next election. But that movement of people going to their county commissioners, going to their board of education, going to their libraries is being fueled and funded by a Christian nationalist narrative. You're going to meet now the pastor of the church where Myra Flores, Representative Flores, started her work. He's the pastor that baptized her and then got her into this work. You can see his "Make America Godly Again" banner on the back. He also wears it on his shirt. You can see the Chronicles 7:14 passage and blurred out there because of the bokeh on the background. And you can see some video of the church service and hear him speaking, and then a brief interview. And you sort of, again, see the whole wrap-up of so many of these issues about how people end up here, including seeing the United States as the new Israel. You'll see people blowing a shofar in the church service, wearing Jewish prayer shawls, the Star of David on a flag and the Star of David on flags that they're using outside the White House. So the combination of Christianity and Jewish artifacts together to establish the United States as the representative of the new Israel. That's one of the things that you see in this little clip here, as well as a whole lot of other things, including the founding of the country narrative and all the rest. So this is the pastor.
You know that Thomas Jefferson said that you couldn't even call yourself a Christian, an American, if you weren't a God-fearing Christian. And we're going to proclaim that this nation belongs to you, God. Like it was founded in 1776, Lord. Lord, we pray for the supremacy of God in this nation again.
How involved do you think someone like you should actually be in politics and in guiding policy?
Oh, I think we need to. I mean, we like I said, this nation was founded under God, and so we've gone away from that. The church has.
But the nation, in the Constitution and in the Declaration of Independence, it doesn't give any partiality to Christianity. In fact, the opposite, right? And how do you reconcile those two things?
There's freedom of religion, but at the same time, they understood that this whole foundation was built on the Word of God. If we understood, they don't want to force it on you, but they understood, okay, this Constitution will be built. They used 27 scriptures to form the Constitution.
But Thomas Jefferson, who you quoted on stage to your audience, he's very much the one that believed in the separation between church and state. So again,
But you know what? It's funny because that separation of church that always comes up. But it was never a law, and that's the thing. Like as a pastor, I just wanted to tell pastors it's okay to talk about politics in your church. You won't get in trouble.
Thank you, Jesus.
In Cabrera's view, Mayra Flores is the beginning of something much bigger.
Thank you, Jesus. And devil, we're going to kick you out. Kick you out of our cities, kick you out of our states, and kick you out of this nation, and kick you out of that White House in the name of Jesus.
When you say something like the states belong to Judah or the states belong to Christianity, is that not dangerous?
How am I being a danger to society if I'm preaching what the Bible teaches and all we want to do is just...
Politicians are elected to serve the people, right?
Exactly.
To serve everybody, not to serve a God.
Yeah, but hold on, but we are electing them. So they're representing us.
Yeah, and there's also Muslims that elect them. And
Yeah,
there's,
exactly.
I mean,
So
right.
that's what I'm saying. So now as a voice, as a church, we have a right to vote for whoever we want to vote for. So, but if we don't use that voice, then what's the point then? Then we're not doing our jobs as Christians to vote for people that have our values. When you're born again, like your mentality changes. I don't think like a Latino no more. I think like a man of God.
Are there any candidates that Make America Godly Again has endorsed?
Myra was just the beginning. It was just, I mean, she opened a door for other people to walk through.
I mean, you yourself were there during her inauguration.
Exactly.
And if I remember correctly, you told Speaker Pelosi that you wanted to take this country back for God.
That's right. And that was, let me tell you, it was, if I died today, it was worth it.
From the United States Capitol to...
All right, so there's a lot going on there too, right? But you start to see there's some sincerity, there's a frame of belief, it makes sense. It doesn't seem, there's some confusion about the pieces, but these are deeply held beliefs that people hold. We're going to start moving into this call for greater empathy and greater engagement, and the most important thing is to now start to think these are people who have beliefs, not beliefs that have just taken over people, right? So if we're going to talk about these ideas, we're going to be talking with people about their lived experience with these beliefs. So there's a lot of heartfelt belief that goes into these kinds of assumptions that people have. And one of those beliefs is a holy war narrative. Some of you might know that General Michael Flynn, who's a former general in the United States military and former national security advisor and then confessed felon and then pardoned, is on, has an effort that he has moving around called the Reawaken America Tour. This is a flyer from the one that I went to in August in Rochester, outside of Rochester, New York. And we did a counter protest at this event with a number of other groups, Faith in Public Life and Vote Common Good and some other groups, and I attended the sessions. So we're going to show you some video clips out of those sessions. But this is Michael Flynn's effort. Do you have a hand?
Yeah, I was just curious to what extent the holy war narrative is kind of connected to the holy war narrative that's so prevalent in like white supremacist movements in the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah, it's one of the places where people see the two chords, the white nationalist chord and the Christian nationalist chord going into the same power strip, is around something like this, that they're using the same rhetoric. They're using the same narrative that we have to gear people up. Part of what makes this so powerful, because it's General Flynn, he stands on stage at some points and says, I'm a general here giving you orders. So it's really, and we're going to show you a clip here, this one, it comes out of the Frontline special that was done by PBS and the Associated Press. It came out last week. It's really worth watching. You can watch on the PBS app or online. It's about 40 minutes. It's called Michael Flynn's Holy War. And they're taking his work when he was in Afghanistan and Iraq and declared that to be a holy war there and takes it into the United States now. So this holy war narrative motivates a lot of people. If people know the passage from the Bible, our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities in the heavenly realms. That kind of stuff is what they're talking about. In fact, you'll hear Michael Flynn reference that right here.
General Michael Flynn, ladies and gentlemen.
Michael Flynn's political influence has only grown since the January 6th insurrection.
Tomorrow, we the people are going to be here, and we want you to know that we will not stand for a lie.
General Flynn, do you believe in the peaceful transition of power in the United States of America?
The fifth. Flynn has endorsed around 100 candidates for federal, state, and even local offices. raised millions, and helped launch the Reawaken America tour that mixes politics and religion.
I mean, there is a spiritual war and there is a political war. And they are going on. They're going on in this country right now. Since the November Virginia election across the country, we have overturned 200 school boards in this country. 200.
Flynn is getting in front of audiences and he's using Christian nationalist rhetoric to rally people who want to be fed that because they want to be excited, mobilized.
They're going to shut our churches down and they're going to tell you, you're going to get mandated to do this, you're going to get mandated to do that.
Christian nationalism threatens democracy because it is fundamentally anti-democratic by nature. It doesn't prioritize the incorporation or the participation of all Americans.
They say you're a Christian nationalist. Are you?
What is that? I'm an Irish Catholic.
We should skip that question. He's an Irish Catholic general who served
I'm a follower of Jesus. How's that?
33 years in the military serving his country.
I'd commend that special to you to take a look at it. Look, if you're doing the work Michael Flynn is doing, and you're doing this work right now, like he just, a week ago, he was up the road, right? They did this thing outside of Lancaster. And you don't know what Christian nationalism is to be able to answer the question, yes or no. You're either not paying attention, quite possible, or you're not being honest. I think even more likely. So it's not a fair, it might be a fair question if you like lean across the table to some friend of yours, you know, and just be like, hey, you a Christian nationalist? They might be like, honestly, what is that? My Uber driver last night, she said, what do you do? And I told her what we do. And she goes, I've never even heard of Christian nationalism. Like, that's fair. Michael Flynn has heard of Christian nationalism, right? So that's what's going on. There's this holy war narrative that these folks are pushing and that they're working to make happen. How does it all make sense? Ultimately, through this final one on this description, which is something that's often referred to as the 7 mountains. And the idea of this is that God's anointed leaders are put into positions of power to influence society. But it's not just one area of society, it's 7. So often referred to as 7 mountains. The imagery here comes from Moses going up to Mount Sinai, being blessed by God as the leader, and then coming down to the people of Israel. But instead of going up to one mountain, there are 7 mountains: arts and entertainment, business, education, family, government, media, and religion. Finding anointed leaders, sometimes in the Christian faith, sometimes just used for the Christian faith, that are put into positions of power to bring this about. Christian nationalism is going to move around the globe, not only through our governments, but through every sector through these 7 sectors of society. That's the real work that's going on. If you're familiar with something called the National Prayer Breakfast, it happens in Washington, D.C., and people go, it is funded and fueled and has been from the beginning by people who push this idea. Specifically, what they're doing at that meeting is bringing key leaders from around the world in the areas of government together to start to select the people that can move the agenda of Christian nationalism around the world.
I'm just wanting a clarification on arts and entertainment versus media. I mean, I would assume it's something like arts and entertainment is something like pure clicks film.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
media would be like Fox News.
Movie and TV, news, social media, that kind of stuff. Yep. Yep. Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Yeah, that's a good distinction. And so what they're doing is putting people into power in all of these areas. Just stop for a minute and think about how grandiose this is, how powerful, how long it's been going on, how deeply rooted in many sectors of our society it is, and how well funded it is. Stuff isn't happening by accident. That's why you heard Catherine Stewart say it's not something bubbling up from the ground up and people are like, well, what is Christian? No, this is people intentionally inserting Christian nationalist narratives into private school and Christian school education. There's a whole lot of plans going on, not just taking over school boards, but taking over private education and private Christian and Catholic school curriculum to be able to put Christian nationalist ideas in there. And I'm not trying to be cabalish about this. Like there's some these people are not, what I'm describing to you is not a secret cabal funded by nameless person. It's public stuff that they brag about and stand on stages and are like, since November, we've overturned 200 school boards. Send us a check, right? I'm not exposing some deep, dark secret. just describing the stuff that they're already doing. So we'll show you a couple of examples of that. This idea, though, about an anointed person being in leadership, this is what makes Donald Trump make sense to the Christian nationalists. It's not that Donald Trump is the example of being a Christian. It's the anointed leader like King Cyrus from the Bible, used by God. Why do I think that? Well, when I went to that tent meeting that you saw in the film with Michael Flynn and the one that I showed you a picture of, I walked in the side of the tent. The image is just upside down because the video starts out that way for some reason, but I leave it there because it reminds me. That's how I felt when I went in. Like everything stops topsy-turvy. And I'm walking in, and you're going to hear very faintly in the background the preacher on the stage saying, like King Cyrus, that's what he's referencing. And then he goes on this bit about how we should decide who to vote for in this country. And it's not whether they're Christian, it's whether they're anointed by God or not. This Seven Mountain stuff. So here it is.
Walking into the doesn't even know the Lord. Great Awakening. Because all the Christians, if you ever talk to Christians during an election cycle, here's what they care about. Is he a Christian? Is he a Christian? They want to know if their candidate's a Christian. Is he a Christian? Let me tell you something. One of the worst presidents we ever had was Jimmy Carter, and he was a Christian. The question you should be asking isn't, is he a Christian? You should ask, is he anointed and chosen by God for the job?
A small smattering of standing ovation for, was he anointed and chosen by God for the job? So when someone like Dan writes a song that says, I see nothing about the values that my faith tradition told me, why would you pick this guy? And they're like, oh, we don't need the person to have character. That was just a critique of Bill Clinton. What we need is the person to be chosen by God. I'm going to show you two more examples of this and then tie this together with election denying so you can see the motivation for people. If you have people in your world who you're like, I don't understand what you're doing, there might be a little window of understanding of how it makes sense to them in a moment. So this clip is from the Christian Broadcasting Network. It's an interview done with the then Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, when he was in Israel, and he's asked by a reporter, do you think Donald Trump is the modern version of Queen Esther? Here we go with the Queen Esther thing again. Here we go with the nation of Israel and the United States. Here we go with the anointed leader narratives. And you'll see Mike Pompeo's response.
There he is. You doing well? Walking firmly through the door, Mike Pompeo is a determined man. Both our Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and I had the opportunity to interview the Secretary of State. It was part politics, part policy, and part spiritual, especially for a strong Christian who experienced a refreshing in the Holy Land.
Could it be that President Trump right now has been sort of raised for such a time as this, just like Queen Esther, to help save the Jewish people from an Iranian menace?
As a Christian, I certainly believe that's possible. It was remarkable. So we were down in the tunnels where we could see 3,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago, if I have the history just right, to see the remarkable history of the faith in this place. And the work that our administration has done to make sure that this democracy in the Middle East of this Jewish state remains, I'm confident that the Lord is at work here.
Those might be Mike Pompeo's personal beliefs, but when you're in that job, that's not what you talk about. But the Christian nationalists love it. They see it in Mike Flynn. They see it in Mike Pompeo. They see it in Mike Pence. They see it in all the Mikes. That these people are advocating for a Christian nationalist narrative out in public. And many of them are saying, finally, for the first time, our government is talking about its Christian traditions. That's why they doubled down on them. You might recognize this person. He was talking in a critique of the Trump administration about the Trump administration's work in Syria, and he says this.
However, is now allowing the Christians and the Kurds to be massacred by the Turks. And I believe, and I want to say this with great solemnity, the President of the United States is in danger of losing the mandate of heaven if he permits this to happen.
Now, if you don't have in your category, the presidents of the United States could lose the mandate of heaven, then you don't understand how Christian nationalists view the world. Selected leaders anointed by God with the mandate of heaven to accomplish the purposes of God in the world. The work of our administration is the Lord's work here in Israel. Holy war narratives. That's what's going on. So when people get all wound up about Christian nationalism, it might not just be the left, might not just be the media, might not just be trying to stop Christians from being Christians. It might be trying to get rid of this kind of stuff. So just imagine with me for a minute if this is what you hold to this view. And you believe that through the democratic system, somehow the will of God is worked out so the anointed one is chosen. And the anointing is still on that person in the re-election. And then the person doesn't win. What's the explanation? Someone cheated the system. And not only did they cheat the system, those who cheated the system have now cheated God. So our work now is to overcome the cheaters of God. Election denying, holy war narrative, Christian nationalism, insurrections are all justified. So if your feed or your conversation or things you're talking, and you're like, I don't know what you're talking about, this is the kind of stuff that people are talking about. All right, so what can churches do? We're going to make this pretty quick. You're going to hear from Steph here in a second. One, our churches need to start talking about this stuff. You know, I commend you for your boldness, to borrow a phrase from a previous. Thanks for hosting this. Look, there's a way we have to figure out how to talk about this stuff as churches. But churches have a wicked sense of no talk rules on this stuff. But at some point, you just got to talk about Bruno. You can't just continue to avoid it over and over. If that's not funny to you, find a 7-year-old or 9-year-old as to why that's funny. So it's a song from a movie. You have to talk about Bruno. We have to talk about this stuff. But here's the thing that family systems therapists remind all of us of. And that is, when you're in a family system that has no talk rules, like churches and faith communities have no talk rules, to break the no talk rules, you don't just start talking about it because you have bad habits, because you're not good at it, because you don't have the skills, because people keep getting on each other's back, because you don't know what to do yet. So you have to develop capacities to talk about something so that you can talk about it. So what our churches need to do is start finding ways to talk about it. This is a good start. There's lots of curriculum available in lots of places. This is a great book for a book club. If you were looking at another one, Kristen Dumais has a great bit of stuff on this. We have lots of stuff on our website about this. And that's an exceptional one. That's Kristen. You're not going to hear from her now, but because we've gone a little long. Also, find a way to make conversations in church about faith and also to use discipleship of civic engagement. You don't have to be partisan. And look, pastors that are worried about this stuff, a lot of us have been pastors long enough. We know people don't do what we tell them to do. So don't worry about that. You can tell them who to vote for. Doesn't mean they're going to do it. But that's not the point. It's not like vote for this person, not that person. It's talk about this stuff. Raise it. Engage with it. This would be another book that might be helpful. Shane Claiborne wrote this book called Jesus for President, Politics for Ordinary Radicals. A really great thing. Some people are readers and not talkers, so provide to them a serious set of resources for all of this stuff. And then churches can be honest about the practices that we have that support Christian nationalism real subtly. Christians and Christian churches get a lot of default benefit in the society. We should name it. If we've got good at naming it when it comes to things like white Christian nationalism default, that would help all of us. So get good at talking about it. And finally, what can individuals do? Engage with deeper levels of empathy. Personalize this. Find some friends who hold these views and ask them what they think. Ask them why they think it. And most importantly, try to understand what role it plays in their lives. Look, all of us hold our beliefs for reasons we can explain and can't explain, but we also know that they function. We keep them around because they do something in us. Christian nationalist views do something for people. The United States has a habit of having 3 characters in our public discourse: heroes, villains, and victims. And people get slotted into one of those places. Rarely do we slot ourselves into the villain category, by the way. Often heroes, sometimes a victim, and someone's the villain. Personally, I think that's not a helpful way to view the world. I think we have a much better way for humanity. All of our religious traditions offer us the co-sojourner model, that we are humans on this journey of life on this planet, figuring out how to get home at night. We're journeying together, and we should see one another as co-travelers in this human experience, and not as heroes and villains and victims. But just know that most people have those three categories. So when you come to someone, know that they are probably slotting themselves as the hero or the victim. Christian nationalists do this all the time. They are simultaneously the victim of a country that won't let them be Christian enough and the heroes that are going to win it back, but never the villains. Literally, the people in the insurrection were the heroes in their own story. So just remember, when you're talking to someone, they likely see themselves as the hero or the victim. So when you ask the question, how does this function in your life? It is, how does this help you see yourself as a hero or as a victim? And then invite them to be a co-traveler to a better way of life together, where we can get rid of that. In a few moments here, Steph's going to sing you a little song that says it's just another song about love. So what we've got to do is stir up a little bit more love in each other. Now, that stuff is really hard. We don't spend a lot of time on detailing what to do around that issue, because you've got to figure this out for whomever you are, however you are, and all the rest. Nick is going to finish us here in our formal presentation part with a poetic piece that he's created. We've been making this, as Rob said, 2 hours ago at the start of all this. We've been making this as we've been traveling, adding new stuff most days. Nick has been memorizing this piece. He's crafted it and put it together. It's really exceptional. It was just in the Holland newspaper in Holland, not the country, but the city in West Michigan. And so this is Nick Brock.
The original Declaration of Independence rests within a frame made of pure titanium that's coated with gold. The glass enclosing it is tempered, laminated, and calibrated to a thickness of 3/8 of an inch in order to block out harmful UV light. And 70 bolts around the frame apply 300 pounds of pressure per linear inch, sealing it in. Inside the frame, parchment from 1776 sits atop a perforated aluminum platform so that moisture can reach the backside of it in order to keep it supple. And all the while, inert argon kept at approximately 40% humidity and 60 degrees Fahrenheit staves off the oxidation process. And most grandiose of all, the case housing the Declaration, along with the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights, collectively known as the Charters of Freedom, are lowered beneath the ground every night into a custom-built vault made to withstand a nuclear blast. But despite these advances for preservation and security, the ability to detect problems is growing faster than the capability to solve them. And most importantly, figuring out what to do if a problem arises. And so it is with us, friends. Though our concern reside not with the preservation and security of parchment and ink, but with preserving and securing within the hearts and minds of the people a readiness to re-examine, reimagine, and reinterpret the guarantees of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness when they become crooked, narrow, and hell-bent on making America great in the name of me, the people, instead of we, the people. What then shall we do, you might ask? I'd like to suggest scripture, American scripture. On November 19, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln would use only 272 words for delivering his Gettysburg Address. The speech, lasting just 2 minutes long, would enter the lexicon of American scripture as one of the most powerful and concise statements of freedom our nation has ever heard. And drawing upon his unwavering quest for pursuing the true spirit of our nation's founding creed, Lincoln would posit a new vision America for America amidst the chaos and rancor of civil war. So standing thus on the bloodstained fields of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Lincoln would stand up and say, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. Lincoln would continue on, but in a larger sense. It is for us to be here dedicated to this unfinished work thus far so nobly advanced. It is for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom. Lincoln's invitation to participate in the nation's unfinished work of equality would indeed usher in a new birth of freedom, rooted in the sentiment that American exceptionalism, thenceforward and forever, shall include those pushed to the very margins of society, the outcasts. And that to truly make and keep America great, this exceptionalism is incumbent upon each and every citizen patriot of this nation, no matter their race, color, national origin, or later to include sex, marital status, age, disability, etc., etc., etc. Or in other words, love your neighbor as yourself. In the hands of Lincoln, the Declaration became a living document, willing and able to inspire faith, hope, and love for the common good whilst confronting conspiracy, secession, insurrection, and a rebellion against the peace, sanctity, and union of the United States government. Friends, are you picking up what I'm putting down here? Ultimately, though, the preservation and security of the Declaration rests not just in the hands of presidents and politicians, but in we, the people. Poets, prophets, preachers, and you. Yes, you, sir. And you, ma'am. And you, and you, and you, and you. Which brings me back to where I began, with parchment and ink, what to do, and this Sharpie. There were 56 signers willing to sign their name to the Declaration of Independence, an act of treason, mind you, against the British Crown. And chief among them were Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and the like. The first, however, was John Hancock, with his signature best remembered for being the largest and most flamboyant over all the rest. Anecdotes from American folklore suggest that Hancock wrote in such a manner as to make his defiance against King George III more than obvious to the naked eye and to those needing spectacles. However, no historical document remains as to why he wrote in the way he did. But what we do know is this: someone had to go first and pave the way for the others. Someone had to go first and pave the way for the others. Friends, one way we share in the work of Vote Common Good is by inviting you to sign on with us. When you make a declaration, a commitment to confronting Christian nationalism and insurrections with faith, hope, and love. We invite you to take this pen and sign your name, city, and state, and then we will take that with us on our rather than large bus. And we will take your name with us throughout the entire Midwest. And moreover, we will take the work of this place here tonight. So though our bus is no longer parked right outside, I have a contingent plan. There's this pen and a few others like it, and you can meet me in the back, and we have sheets of paper where you can do the same, and we will then duplicate that on the bus. So I invite you to join me afterwards and to bring your signature onto that paper. Finally, I'd like to leave you with these closing words from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Though the world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, may our government of the people, by the people, and for the people never perish from the earth. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
How we gonna build a bridge? And all we do is build a wall. How can we claim we're not all same when God made us all? And how we gonna raise our babies? Yeah, how we gonna teach them grace? Preach about love on Sundays. Yeah, but Mondays is back to hate. So here's another song about loving each other. Just another song about digging down deep. Take a good look at the heart of your brother. Will we all laugh? We all love. We all bleed. We all want a better tomorrow. Yeah, 'cause everybody's had enough of all of the hurt and the hatred. Yeah, we could sure use some love. Yeah, but getting there it won't be easy. So much work to be done. For better or worse, it's all up to us. But a change has got to come. So here's another song about loving each other. Just another song about digging down deep. Take a good look at the heart of your brother. You'll be all laugh. We all love. We all bleed. But a change has got to come. Yeah, so here's another song about love. It's just another song about love.
That is Steph Mahan from Nashville, Tennessee. Thanks so much for being with us. We know it's a couple minutes over, so we know some people may need to cut out. At some point, I guess the bus has got to pull up because we got to get our stuff in it. Is that a plan? Yeah. So anyway, if you sign the back, or if you stick around long enough, you might get to sign the bus yourself.